Hey guys, welcome back to Data with Dominic, and today we're going to build an AI chatbot in Python backed by Google Gemini's new 2.5 Flash model. Alright, it's very simple, and we're going to be using less than 60 lines of code to get this done. Alright, so it's going to be crazy. I'm just going to put up a short video of what we're going to be building here today, so you can just get a quick idea. So that's what we're going to be building today in less than 60 lines of code. It's really insane. Alright, so let's get started right away. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is basically I've created a public repository called Gemini Chatbot. So I'll link to this in the description of the video. All the code you need will be available here. You can check that out if you have any doubts. Alright, so the first thing we need to do after creating this public repository is coming over to VS Code and then cloning that Git repository. Okay, so I'm going to hit clone from GitHub, clone Git repository, clone from GitHub, and now it's searching in my profile hopefully and looking for public repositories that I have. Alright, so it's found my Gemini chatbot, and I'm going to just come over and create a new folder called Gemini Chatbot 3 and select as repository destination. So we're cloning that public repo here. Open. Alright, so basically we're all set up and ready to get started. Okay, so the first thing we need to do before we actually begin coding is to get our API keys sorted. Alright, so for that what we need to do is come over to this Google AI Studio. Alright, so just need to search Google AI Studio, open it up, and it brings you to this this window where you can hit get API key. Alright, once you hit get API key, it'll ask you to create an API key. I've already created one, and hence I won't be able to go through that process, but it's very simple. You just hit create API key, and then you'll have an option create API key in a new project. Alright, you hit that, and then you'll get your API key. Copy it down and put it in your notes or somewhere. Don't put it anywhere public or to many people. Keep it safe for you. And you're set up and ready to go. Alright, so once you have your API key, the other important thing is just to check out which model that API key pertains to. Alright, so right now the Gemini API is pointing towards Gemini 2.0-Flash, so just keep that in mind. Alright, and then that'll become important later on. I'll show you when. Alright, so we're all set up with the API key, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come over to our Visual Studio Code and get our Gemini chatbot directory set up for us to basically build and execute this project. Alright, so I'm going to open the terminal and just make sure that we have Python in, let me just zoom in so you guys see it more clearly. Python 3 version. Alright, we're in Python 3.9.6. Alright, and the next thing which we can do is this looks good. The first thing we need to do is just build that virtual environment. Alright, so what is a virtual environment? It basically creates like a sandbox inside this Gemini chatbot directory, which allows us to install dependencies, import libraries and packages, which will be applicable only to this project, right? We don't need these libraries for our global Python installation. So if we don't create a virtual environment, what happens is any libraries we install goes into our computer-wide Python instance, and then it slows it down or it causes issues and dependency errors later on when we're working with other projects. Alright, so it's good programming practices just to always create a Python virtual environment when you're building a project. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is make sure we're inside the particular Gemini chatbot directory, right? So if you open it through VS Code, you'll get very easy, you'll already be brought there by default. But if you're doing it in a separate terminal program, navigate to this particular folder which you're working in using the ls and cd commands. I have a video on how to use the shell, which I'll link to in the top right hand corner of the screen. Check that out if you guys are not sure as to how that can be used. But anyways, once we are in that directory, what we need to do is create the Python virtual environment. Right, and this is very easy. All we need to do is call Python and then run this module -m called virtual environment. Right, and then we need to give it a name. And the standard convention is just to always call your virtual environment VNV. Alright, so that's what this command does. You can see we've created this virtual environment here under the name VNV. Alright, and now it's created. The next thing we have to do is basically activate it. Alright, so only once it's activated, it gets instantiated, and then when we type in commands into the terminal, it's all going into that virtual environment. So far we've only created the structure. Alright, so now to activate it, what we need to do is just write source virtual environment bin activate. Alright, so just remember this. Alright, now that virtual environment has been activated, you can see this bracket VNV before the terminal prompt. So once that's done, we can start installing the packages and libraries that we need for this particular project. There's not much, it's just Google's generative AI package. So we can do a pip install google-generative AI, and then we can also give it a python.py python.env, because we're going to be calling the API key from a secure .env file. Alright, so just mention that. So I'm going to hit enter, and it's downloading this Python package. Alright, so that's done. It took a bit of a while, so just maybe clear it to make it a little more visible. I just entered clear, and that clears your terminal. So the next thing we need to do is basically store our API key securely. Alright, this is why we put that in the package installation. We added that python -.env, and basically it's just bad coding practice to paste your API key or hard code your API keys directly into your code file. Alright, so instead what we're going to do is we're going to store it in a special file that our Python script will read. Alright, and that special file is called a .env file, basically an environment file. Alright, and how we do that is we can just create a file called .env. How do you create a file? Touch is the command. Again, check out that shell video or zsh/bash video. I'll link to that in the top right hand corner of your screen. If you ever want to get into coding seriously, the shell is something you need, or the command line interface or terminal, whatever you call it, is something you need to master. Alright, so check out that video. It brings you to an intermediate level in like 15 minutes. So touch.env. Alright, and the .env file has been created. Alright, and then what we can do is basically just come here and paste Gemini API key, and then for this we can paste our API key here. Alright, so I'm just going to go get my API key and paste it in here and save it. Alright, I can't show you that process obviously because it's a confidential API key, but the only thing I'm going to do at this point is go back to AI Studio, copy my API key, paste it here instead of the selected text, save it and close this. Alright, so I'm just going to do that. Alright, so I've done that process. I've saved the API key instead of the your API key here text, and then the only thing I'm left to do is start creating the Python code in itself. Alright, for the structure of the chatbot. Alright, so let's get into that process. For that I'll probably need a bit more space. So the first thing we need to do is just create the actual file which will hold our Python code. So I'm going to call it chatbot.py. So I'm just going to do a touch chatbot.py to create that file. And alright, we have a touch chatbot.py. Alright, so that's ready to go. And now what we can do is begin coding. Alright, so let's get started with chatbot.py. So the first thing we need to do is start obviously importing the libraries that we need to work on this project. Alright, so the first one we need is called the OS library, and this is basically like the operating system toolbox in Python, right? And what we need this for is basically since we created that .env file, we need this library for our script to be able to go into that .env file, access our API key, and bring it back into this session of the chatbot, right? So we're going to do an import OS, and then we're also going to import that Google Generative AI library which we installed. So Google.Generative AI. Actually, I spelled everything correct. It's a long name, so maybe I'll call it as Gen AI since it's a long thing to type out each time. Alright, and finally what we need to do is from .env import load.env, right? Alright, and what this does is basically it gives us access to this function called load.env, which basically allows us to access that. It's like a helper function which knows how to find and load secrets from the .env file. Alright, so now that that's set up, we can begin the prep work. Alright, the configuration of Python chatbot. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is obviously get that chatbot file. Alright, get that, I'm sorry, not the chatbot file, the API key from the .env file. Alright, so what we can do is we can say we're going to load environment variable from the .env file. Alright, so we've commented that, and how we do that is just simple. We import that load.env file and we just call it as a function. Alright, and then it's ready to go. Hey, go find my .env file and load the secrets inside it so my script can access it later on whenever it's called. Alright, and secondly what we need to do is configure Gemini's API with the key that this file has, that this load.env function has gone and called. Alright, so what are we doing? We are basically configuring the Gemini API with the key from .env file, right? And we can put this inside a try and catch block just so that we have error handling down. So if there's any issue with this part and we've not saved any, there is no Gemini API key, the whole program doesn't crash, right? So try, and the way we're going to do this is genai.configure and then API underscore key equals OS get environment Gemini underscore API key. Alright, so that should be good to go. And if you just look at this line of code closely, what we're doing is basically configuring Gen AI, which is basically the Google Generative AI package with the API key, and we're calling that OS library again using the get environment function from that os.get environment. Basically, this load.environment enables this OS get environment to go in to that file and then look for the key value pair, right? So the key here is the Gemini API key, and the value which it's actually pulling will be the secret key which we pasted in there and saved the file as. Alright, so once that's done, we can close it with an except block, which is basically where we attribute the errors, right? So maybe we can print out a message, error, the Gemini underscore API key was not found, right? So, and then exit the program without crashing it. Alright, so basically now we've configured everything that we need. We've pulled the secret API key, and then we've configured Google's Gen AI library with that API key, so it should theoretically be able to go and access. The next thing we need to do is basically initializing the model. Okay, so let's create the generative model. So to do that, creating the generative model, and how we're going to do that is create an object called model and then name it Gen AI dot generative model, and then now we just need to specify which is the model we are working with. All right, so and this is when that information comes in handy, which I was talking about, which is the model that we're going to be using, Gemini 2.0 Flash, right? So we can come back here and name that as the model which we're going to be working with. So what this does is we have an object called model, and we're going into the Google Generative AI library, and we're calling this function called generative model, which basically instantiates this model, and we specify that it's 2.0 Flash, which we want to be using. All right, so there's other models. 2.0 Flash is good for text and coding and things like that. There's other models, basically if you want audio, visual, pictures, images and things like that. So anyways, we don't need that for now. So the next thing we're going to do is start a chat session. All right, so we're going to basically create a chat session with this particular model, and we're going to instantiate it without any history, right? There's no context prior to this. Every session, every time we run the program, this Python program, this chatbot will be starting fresh, and there will be no prior context for it. So that's what we need to specify here. So with no context or history. All right, so how do we do this? We create an object called chat, and chat is what we'll be calling later on in our Python program to basically run the model or run our queries to the model. So chat is equal to model dot start underscore chat, and we're going to give it nil history. So that gets our chat object created, which we're going to be working with later on to actually build the Python chatbot. And it's based on the model that we just initialized, and it uses the start chat function. Okay, and we've given it nil history or context. We'll be creating videos a little later on about how we can include context or history and build more advanced chatbots or models or agents and things like that. So definitely subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any updates. But now let's dive into basically the important part of the video, which is how to build the chatbot and how to get it to work like a chatbot where you can ask it questions and it replies, and then you can continue the conversation. All right, so the first thing we need to do is basically just maybe separate this part of the code. We'll give it some housekeeping. So main chat loop is here, and what we can do is print Gemini chatbot is ready. We are using 2.0 Flash version. Type quit if you want to exit the chatbot, right? Full stop, and yep, we should be ready to go. Maybe we can put some lines of code just to separate it. Yep, so that should give us some differentiation. Okay, so that's just basically giving us a header when we start this program. So the first thing we need to do is create an infinite loop. All right, and why we need to create an infinite loop is basically we want an ability for ourselves to keep continuing the conversation. All right, so every instance as it passes through the code, what's going to happen is we're going to put an input, it's going to be sent to the model is going to come back with some answers, and then that is one iteration, right? Until we exit the chatbot by typing quit, we want it or we want the opportunity to continue the conversation, right? So that's why we have to wrap it in an infinite loop. So we're just going to do while true, which is going to continue running till we manually exit it by typing quit, right? So the first thing we need to do is basically get our input, which is what we want to ask the chatbot, right? So what we can do is maybe get input from the user. So input is equal to just input, and then all right, so we have our input taken. The next thing we need to do is basically just this, basically if not in user input dot strip, what basically does is checks that we haven't just hit enter without entering any data, right? So which would cause the program to crash if there was no if this check was not in place, because null characters will be going to the model, and then the model does not know what to do with it, so it's going to return an error, right? So this if all right, so we had a bit of a mic malfunction, but anyways, we were here. So what we're doing is handling if the user didn't enter any input and just hit to our prompt and just hit enter in a null character, which would cause an error. So we're going to handle that by using this dot strip check, right? So Gemini needs something to work with, you idiot. It's late at night, so I'm not in the mood. But anyways, continue. And what that basically does is if they have entered null character 0 characters and hit enter, it prints out this message, and then it jumps to the next iteration of the code, so the user can have his chance again to enter some input. So just document that skips to the next iteration and of the loop if data is not fair enough. That's fine. And finally, the last thing we need to do is check if the user wants to exit, right? Check if the user wants to exit the chat bot, right? So how do we do that? If user underscore input dot lower is equal to quit, that means he wants to exit. So then we just give print and goodbye, thank you for chatting with Gemini 2.0 flash, right? And then we do a break, which basically exits us from this infinite loop. So that's what's happening here. And the next part which we need to do is send the user input, which we took in this user input, and send it to the LLM, right, for processing. So how we're going to do that is we're going to create a response object, which is the structure that Google's Gemini's Python API works with, right? So how we do that is we're going to encase it in a try and except block just for error handling, all right? And then we're going to put some documentation. User input is sent to the LLM, right? And how we're going to do it is we're going to create a response object, and what that response object is going to contain is we're going to send a message to the chat instance that we created using the Gemini 2.0 flash model, and what it's going to contain is user input, which is what we entered, and it's also going to have a parameter which is stream is equal to true. So the way that what this means is basically the way that these LLMs work is that they are thinking and they continually give an output, right? It's not just one big block of data that lands at one shot. It thinks and it drafts a response, right? And the response is ongoing. If you ever work with ChatGPT, you see it sort of types out the response, right? And in the same way, if we enable stream is equal to true, what happens is the response starts to come in back to our Python chatbot in chunks of data, right? Not just as one whole, which would increase the time and lag. So that's why we've enabled stream is equal to true. And once we've done that, what we can do is start printing the LLM's response, right? So how do we do that? We just put an identifier that this is what Gemini is saying, end is equal to null character. And why we do this end is equal to null character is just so that there's no new line which gets formed, which will just make it confusing, right? So Gemini colon, semicolon, I don't know if it's a colon or a semicolon, whatever that two dots thing is. And then after that, the output comes straight away over there, all right? So for chunk in response, so we've basically created a for loop here, which iterates on our response, which means as our data comes in chunks, this for loop begins outputting the word. So imagine like an array of response which gets appended. The for loop is starting with the first element in the array and outputs that, and then keeps going till it hits the end. And obviously the response is going to come in way before the array reaches the end. So we'll always have a full output. So for chunk in response, we can print whatever that chunk is, right? So the chunk dot text we can output, and again we can put this ends equal to null, so that there's no new line unnecessarily created or spaces unnecessarily added, which will make it look weird. And once the response is fully complete, then we can add a new line. So we do \n over there. That's outside the for loop, so that it's only after the whole response, right? And finally, we can handle the errors as well, except exception as e, and then what we can do is printf Gemini encounter an error while getting a response. Error was e, which we've got and outputted, and then we'll output that and we'll go to the new line so that our next response, our next input can be clean. Alright, so then we're going to save this. Once you've saved this, we should be good to go. Hopefully now when we run it, there's not going to be any issues or surprises or debugging waiting for us. Alright, so let's see what happens. And how do we run this? Basically, we come to this terminal or any other terminal, navigate to the directory, start the virtual environment and hit Python 3. Then we're gonna, what is the file name? Chatbot.py. Alright, and that is done. So is it working? Let me see. Let me make this bigger for you guys. Okay, it's a bit too big. Alright, yeah, so Gemini chatbot is ready. We are using 2.0 flash version. Type quit if you want to exit the chatbot. So let us test. The first thing we want to test is just hitting enter without putting any date per. We should be firmly reprimanded. Gemini needs something to work with, you idiot. Alright, perfect. So let's give it something. Who are you? What can you do for me? And countered API key invalid. Oh, right, sorry. I had just, I was just committing the file to Git, and what I did was I may have accidentally removed the code and removed the API key and just put some placeholder text there just to make it easier to work with. So that same command should work right now. I've corrected that. Who are you and what can you do for me? I'll just quit and run it again. Alright, since we've already loaded the Gemini version. So Python, okay, who are you and what can you do? Gemini ends is an invalid keyword argument for print. Oh, obviously made a typo somewhere in the code. Yeah, ends. Okay, another typo, so that we've corrected, and hopefully run it again and we should be good to go. Again, third time. Who are you? It's late at night, sorry. Who are you and what can you do? Please work. Yes, thank you God. Oh my gosh, finally. I am a large language model trained by Google. This is Gemini's response. In simpler terms, I'm an AI that's been trained on massive amount of text data. This allows me to communicate and generate human-like text in response to a wide range of prompts and questions. Generate text, answer questions, translate languages, summarize text, provide info, follow instructions, engage in convo, brainstorm ideas, help with creative writing, draft emails and documents. I am not human, I don't have feelings and opinions. Crazy. Tell me a cringe dad joke. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. Oh my God. It's too late at night for this nonsense. And after that, what can I write a poem about my YouTube channel data with Dominic, asking people to subscribe so that one day I can buy a Porsche. Okay, a channel is born, a screen's light, data with Dominic shining bright. Subscribe today, it's quick and free, and help a future vision be for every click a step he takes towards the day. For goodness, he'll trade his keyboard for a wheel, a throaty engine, a potent zeal. So click that button, show your love, and help him buy that Porsche above. Oh shit, this is really good. I need to remember. Oh my gosh, that's not half bad. Oh my gosh. All right, so that is saved anyways. Excuse that, but yeah, that was really good. Anyways, yeah. So as you've seen, if we had quit, we should be out of the chatbot loop, and we're back into our terminal prompt. But yeah, so we basically built a very simple Python Gemini Google AI chatbot, which uses this 2.0 Flash API. And we've done it in less than 60 lines of code. It's so easy. And then now on top of this, you can wrap it in a nice user interface be it with tkinter in Python or on the web with Node or something like that, Node and React. But yeah, this is just the basics, and we're going to be building different models different chatbots with other models. We're going to be working with other models more extensively and at a more advanced level. So definitely subscribe and hit that bell icon, like, comment, share, so that you never miss an update and so that I can buy a Porsche one day maybe. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget those call to actions, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.